Hi, this is Jim. Welcome to another episode of Kitchen Table Adulting. Today, our topic is how to write a cover letter. And our guest is Matt Warzel. Hello, Matt.
Hello, Jim. Thank you for having me today.
You're very welcome. And Matt is the president of MJW Careers, LLC. I'll include your web domain in my show notes. And so you have quite an extensive background in helping people with cover letters. So let's start here. What is a cover letter?
A cover letter, right? So if you are a job seeker, there is going to be a few essential items you need in your quote unquote job hunting toolkit. And one of them is a cover letter. Most of you probably have heard of them in the audience. Whether or not you have one is another story, but almost all of you probably have just the resume at least. So we're starting off in a good spot. The resume is the most important piece and component of your job hunting kit, but the cover letter is almost just as important. And here's why. And I'll get into what the specific of what it is, but I have to start off with saying that in the job hunting game, and it is a game, you got to play it right. And there are always about half the audience, half the hiring manager audience that will read the cover letter, or we'll just say we'll even clump in recruiters to that metric. So you got half the people who want to read them and the other half who don't. If you're applying to a role, I've never had an instance personally. Now, this isn't for everybody because job hunting is wonky and there's a lot of personalities that go involved into that decision making. But I've never had a client come to me and say, I lost this interviewing opportunity because I sent a cover letter. If the hiring manager doesn't want to read a cover letter, they'll just not open it and they'll open your resume. If they expect to read a cover letter, and if you don't have one, then you might be discredited. So you got to play the game first and foremost. And a cover letter is essentially, it's just an introduction and it kind of sets up the resume. It's essentially you teasing the reader to say, here, open up my resume because I got a lot of value to offer you. It introduces you to the employer, to the potential employer. It tells them what you're applying for. It's how adding you to their organization would be advantageous for them. It demonstrates your understanding of the role and why you're a good fit based off the criteria. And it prompts them to go on and read the resume, which then in turn, hopefully prompts them to want to bring you in for an actual interview. But again, it's a part of the job hunting game. Have a cover letter if you don't have one.
Okay. And yeah, I kind of think about it as putting a person to the resume, which the resume is a list of dates and facts. And so you try to, I guess, to me, the cover letter seems like a more human document between the two.
That's absolutely spot on. And in fact, I even tell my clients that the only time you use personal pronouns is in the cover letter. Follow-up letter, obviously, that kind of thank you stuff. Yes. But up front, the actual job hunting, beginning of the process, you want to have the resume with zero personal pronouns. You want that to be professionally written in terms of your content, and you got to pass that 6-second test, and it does exist. So you got to have a nice setup of your resume that will kind of play up your achievements and your value offerings and why you'd be a good fit. But that cover letter, yes, has some personality. You can use I, you can use we if you're talking about the team. So you do want your touch on the cover letter, and you could have a little personality with it. Just keep the resume professional, though.
Gotcha. And the cover letter is, I'm old enough to use the term business letter format. There's a formal way to set these things up. So if you're completely unfamiliar, first of all, find somebody who does know, but you can look online for examples of cover letters just in terms of the structure of having your address and contact information at the top. I looked at one website today that said having the employer's contact address is sort of an optional thing. I would consider that optional because they certainly know their address. So
right.
by the time you get it to them, they know where they are. But
Yeah. And if you're that nitpicky where, if you might have, like if you left that off and the reader is upset about you not addressing their address, for play on words.
Don't work there.
Yeah. Who wants to work there anyway? I mean, yeah. So, and you're right. Yeah. Contact a little nice intro where, you can maybe mention, hey, I live in this world, the world being your targeted role. Hey, I live in this world, pretty good at what I've been doing in this world for, 10 years. And then here are some highlights kind of wrap it up with a nice little call to action and a nice little sincere sincere goodbye, and you're on your way. Half a page. No one's reading a full page cover letter with 9 paragraphs and it's, small font and all this kind of thing. This isn't your story. This is a little, like we said, a little tease.
Yeah. And I actually follow a rule, or I try very hard to just do 3 paragraphs. Because
Perfect.
I think separately, a side note, now, especially with Indeed or other jobs, sometimes the cover letter is an email. That's a little trickier to me, because with emails, I try to go with what I call the no scroll rule, where you can read the whole thing, without scrolling down. Anyhow, you do want to keep it short. I think 3 paragraphs. One thing that I found in my research is that you first and foremost state the job you're applying for, the title, because especially if it goes to a internal recruiter first, they're recruiting and trying to fill 35 different positions. So if you just say, "Hey, I'm really interested in your company," they don't know what to do with that.
No, and you know what? That's fantastic advice. That's where, if at the top of the cover letter, underneath, your name and your contact information, right around the area where the date and the dear hiring manager, or if you have a name, or good afternoon, hiring team, or what have you, right around that area, right below that, that hello, you can even put in bold the requisition name and vacancy number if you have that. Just, obviously don't be obnoxious if this thing's super long, but if it's, production supervisor and in parentheses, code ACO7, end of parentheses, that's not that much white space. Throw it on there so they can see that you were specifically tied to a certain requisition that's open, a certain opening at that company. So I completely 100% agree.
Yeah, and you started to talk about it just now. One thing that I've seen that the Googleverse completely agrees on is to not open with the phrase "to whom it may concern," which is pretty lame.
Impersonal. Yeah, exactly.
Now, ideally, you find out the name of the hiring manager, but if you don't have any way to network into the company and you can't learn that information, they probably won't tell you over the phone. So calling probably won't get that. But if you don't know, I think the general consensus is to word it "dear hiring manager," which you just mentioned. That seems to me to be a little less tacky and still, cover it.
Yeah, I agree. And I've been using that trick for X amount of years now, 10 years, and I haven't had an issue. I mean, people kind of blow past that anyway, most of the time, because they want to get down to what you're saying. Presentation does matter though. So keep it linear, concise, and pragmatic, and you'll be all set. But yeah, those little nuances like that, don't overthink it. I like that. Hiring manager, hiring team, hiring committee. If it's a product management role, maybe, hey, dear product management team, or decision maker, or, and again, this is getting a little bit broad even. So I always use just dear hiring manager or recruiting team, depending on who you're trying to touch, and leave it at that and move on to the actual guts of the cover letter, which is the most important.
Sure. And I was looking earlier today and found one website that referred to paragraph 1 as the grab, basically trying to hook the reader. So what are your thoughts of the kind of stuff that somebody might mention in that initial paragraph?
Yeah, see, this is where I think exactly that kind of enticing them. My first thing is analyze the job and, both the noted and the assumed needs, because remember, they might not have everything on the job description, but figure out what the assumptions of that role might entail as well that might not be communicated, and determine what those skills the employer is looking for. So then you can immediately address how you will meet those employers' needs. You could begin that letter with, maybe like a strong opening sentence emphasizing, the major selling points and skills you would bring to the job, and then kind of compare the difference between, a typical opening. I'm applying to the job opening I found on Indeed, and these are 2 openings using these examples I'll give you, right? So say like you came across it on Indeed, you could say something like 20 years in senior management with proven expertise in international business for a Fortune 50 company, or, a strong leadership in operations, having reduced costs by 12% and driving productivity throughout my tenure, or whatever. So you kind of hooking them into saying, oh, wow, this person relates to the role and look at these a couple achievements that really grab me and tell me keep reading, because these are eye-catching. They're openers. They're designed to get them to see what you can do. So it's you gotta address their needs up front. That's the one thing I'll make sure your listeners take away. They really, you got to kind of get to the nuts and bolts right away. You can't just have this flowery opening paragraph about thank you for your time and wow, this is really neat to have some eyeballs on my cover letter. It's like, no, get down to the nitty gritty and get them knowing that you got some value.
But for the young adult audience out there who may not have experience or great things to point to, there's still sort of a safe way to word this where you can basically discuss things like, as I read this role, I believe you need somebody who is highly professional, very organized, and has great communication skills. And even though I'm light on, you wouldn't use that term light, but even though I'm light on experience, I bring all that to the table. And you're still
exactly.
You can expand on that.
Yeah, no, I was going to say exactly, because you might not have that proof yet, to demonstrate. So exactly, the transferable things that relate to that targeted role that they know they've acquired, whether it's project-based, experiential, internships, or just frankly their side jobs while they're in school, wherever possible, you want to get those skills that are relating into that first sentence to capture them. And I agree completely with what you just said. They might lean on the soft side. Everyone's organized. Everyone is a great communicator and a team player and that kind of thing. The more experience you gain, the less soft skill driven. But if you got to work in some tangible hard skills that might border soft, but since you're entry level, that's all you got to work with, then, think in terms of project management. You've done that. I mean, everyone wakes up and has to manage their day. So, obviously it might not be as relatable as a senior person or accomplished person coming in saying project management, but it doesn't mean you can't, sprinkle in some of these kind of borderline soft and hard skills. So, the project management, the cross-functional communications, I've even seen data analysis now is being used on a lot of early career folks' cover letters and resumes, because they're analyzing this kind of this data during their projects to formulate whatever recommendations for the team. So they're not realizing that these are little skills they're developing in school that they might not even be aware of that to mention. So these are kind of those skills that you can start weaving in at the beginning, like you said, to hook them in.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of the qualifications, then if you have a lot of work experience, you would then be saying, here's what I've done at other places. And if you don't have that relatable experience, maybe you can draw that from your personal life, as Matt was just saying, that if you're looking for your first ever job, you might be able to say, about I've had these part-time jobs with the following responsibility. I've learned how to keep track of inventory. I've been responsible for managing a staff of 2 other people, or there's kind of a spin culture to this, where you got to look at what you've done in life and say, what did I learn from that? Was I responsible for anything? Did I lead anything? Did I create anything? And as you start to think about those, even though it might have just been a babysitting gig in high school, maybe you were responsible for 13 children, and that shows that you can be responsible.
Exactly. Just think in terms of any sort of work or project base, or even what you learned during a class. I mean, you might have gained some insights as to the functionality of a certain skill and how it's implied and how it relates to the process of that, of the world that it lives in. And so you can even use little lead-in words like, knowledge of, or, rather than saying proficiency of. So it's the way you word it too, like you had mentioned, this transferable ideas that can be sprinkled in if used properly with lead-in words. You can't be using stuff like, accomplished when you are early career. So used aspiring, or used, like we just said, you gain knowledge of process improvements and how, by implementing them, you can save money or save time or reduce waste or whatever. So whatever your world you're living in, that you've gained these skills, like I said before, just start writing them down so you can use them in your arsenal when you're preparing the cover letter and resume. Have it so you don't have to sit there and think for an hour about what the heck you've been doing for the last 5 years. Start to track this stuff.
Yeah, and most people pretty quickly develop sort of the shell of a generic cover letter with all of this. So you're not thinking about this each time you apply for a job. But
yeah, exactly.
Be very careful about when you cut and paste a cover letter to change the job, change the name, and or make sure all the font matches. There are all sorts of little blunders that go along with that. But you're going to have sort of a shell cover letter where you can drop it in a Word document, tweak it a little bit for that employer, and then cut and paste it to the online application.
Absolutely. And the more tailored, the better. Obviously, the more specific, it shows that you're talking the same talk and you understand the same stuff that they're listing, and you're being customized versus, like you said, you don't just have a generic cover letter and send it out for each role. I mean, you really are risking it. And I mean, not to say you're not going to have success. Again, the 50% that don't read them, it's a non-issue, but I would avoid generic cover letters at all costs. You definitely want to massage in the certain spots that need to be tweaked for each role. And yes, it might take a little long, but is it worth it? I mean, I would assume so, because these roles are like leads. These are openings that you have a chance to maybe get some work going and improve your livelihood. So you got to take it serious.
Yep. And whenever it's possible to do some research on the company, it's much better if you can actually network into somebody who already works there, who can tell you a little bit about the culture, but then you can tailor what you're saying towards what they need. For example, if where you're going is a very fast-paced work environment where there are a lot of intense deadlines, then you can say, I know that your company requires people who can meet deadlines, work extra hours, and handle a fast-paced environment, as opposed to saying, I always think of certain like insurance and bank type environments as being sort of slower paced, where you don't want to say like, I like a nice leisurely environment where everyone clocks out at 4:30.
Yeah. Don't ever say that. Even if you think it's like a legit place that probably does watch the clock, don't ever say that. Just always be the go-getter.
Yeah, very true.
You'll figure it out once you get in there on your first few days of work.
Yeah, when everyone starts getting up at 4:30 and walking to their car, then you'll know. So how much should people be willing to reveal things that they don't do well, or I guess the need for growth?
I would say this in terms of trying to head off any potential concerns or reservations on the reader. I would only address things like, maybe the employment gap you might have, or if you've been a job hopper or appear to be a job hopper, anytime that they have any sense of wonder, or, they're not committed to you as a viable candidate. These are the things you want to maybe hash off. If you're like, hey, I'm interested in moving to LA on my own dime, then don't put anything with an address. And if you have a phone number that's not LA, then maybe just put a little note that says relocating to Los Angeles or whatever, so it's known, so there's no reservation. So try to almost like you're reverse engineering. What could their possible reservations be, and make sure you address those if you have any issues like that. But I wouldn't be the first one to admit, again, you're looking at a job description. If there's 10 things and you only can do 5, don't say why you can't do the other 5. It's just, you might not be as high of a candidacy as someone who might be 7 of the 10 things. And again, anyone who's 10 out of 10 is what we call purple squirrel in our industry, meaning, it's like a unicorn. So it's like, you don't see it often. That tends to be true with any jobs, is that you don't have to cross off every single box. So I would say that if there's anything super major you don't meet that's on the job description that might be a reservation, then maybe that scenario you would just mention it briefly, that while I don't have 5 years of MS project experience, I've gained 5 years on SharePoint or whatever kind of maybe relatable software, and can understand the inner workings, and I've already been taking classes on SharePoint, whatever. Yeah. So be specific about it. Don't just let it be kind of a general, well, I've never done any project management, but I'm still okay for this role. Trust me,
willing to give it a try.
Yeah. Let them grill you to get that information out of you. Let them at least get you on the horn, because now it's interview time. And that's what you've been waiting for you to sell yourself. And, a lot of times I've been in that hiring position as a recruiter before where we've made exceptions for people because we wanted them in our fold. So, the training will come in or, what have you. So there's ways they can make accommodations. So yeah, get in the interview room. That's the key with the cover letter and the resume. You're just trying to get into the interview room. So don't ruin your chances because the reader decided that you weren't good because you didn't know what SharePoint was or whatever it is,
The only thing that I think, which you mentioned, is a gap in the resume, which the young adult audience probably doesn't have. This is a big issue for a lot of moms who leave the workplace for a while and come back, or just people who maybe hike the Appalachian Trail for 5 months. And, there's this gap on the resume, which some employers consider to be a red flag. They wonder, were you in jail? Or
right.
How do you explain that? So those should be addressed. You can just say, I was between jobs for a while, helping a sick family member, whatever, something to make them comfortable with the fact that you weren't in jail. And so that's one I would address. And then, a software, if there's a specific software called out, you might say, I don't have experience with that, but I have experience learning 7 other platforms, and I know I'll get up to speed within a matter of weeks, and leave it at that.
Exactly. And I think you hit it on the head too. The employers are understanding more and more, especially with the unprecedented times, that these gaps are going to happen. And I think they're not as quote unquote red flaggy as they used to be. There's still going to be issues. There's still going to be a poor work history, which, I can go into a whole nother podcast about, resume writing. But in terms of the cover letter, less is more relatable, the better to their job and to why you can be of value, and short and sweet. And just that should get you set up for them to at least look at the resume and now start comparing you to the opening.
Yeah. And then in closing it, I guess there's kind of a generic, I hope to hear from you, or I would like to speak to you more about this position, but there's nothing you can put in the closing that is going to either make them call you or not. They know that that's the next step. So I wouldn't spend too many words trying to they'll call me if I word this perfectly. No, they'll call you if they want to call you.
Exactly. Be mindful and polite at the closing. And that's CTA, as much CTA as you can get, which is literally, like you said, hey, I'd love to chat if you got a minute and share a little bit more of my story with you.
And just to translate for the young audience, Matt, when he said CTA, it's call to action, right?
Yes. Yeah. Call to action. Correct.
You're trying to get them to do something, which is call you in for an interview.
Exactly. So whenever you're, even like when you're on a web page, just typing in, going to look for a new tennis racket, that thing that pops up and says, enter here or leave your email here. Those are call to actions. Anything that gets you to do something other than browse.
Yeah. Okay. And let's talk briefly about the things you should never do in a cover letter. First, getting back to my wife's list, typos and grammar mistakes are completely unacceptable. And if you're not really a strong writer, if you're not confident, then find a career center that can help you. If you look at career center near me, there are some that are sort of nonprofit that'll help you with that. But you definitely do not want to send out anything where you have misspelled the company name. Actually, years ago, I worked for Arthur Anderson, which was spelled with an S-E-N.
Right.
And when it was spelled S-O-N, they just tossed the resume and cover letter. Like, you don't even know how to spell the name of the company, so forget it.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. So typos for sure. I mentioned this in my job search podcast. You do not want a super personal email address, like sexymama29@yahoo is not the one you use when you're looking for a job.
Exactly.
And I have seen that. I have been on the when I was hiring in a previous role, I've seen people do that, and it just made me shake my head.
Exactly.
Can you think of any other things that must be avoided?
Yeah. So one thing is, like you had mentioned with the misspelling, but also just adhering to the English grammar rules. I mean, now that we have Grammarly, it's free. Run it through a Grammarly check, because one thing that pet peeves me is capitalization, over capitalizing things that you think are important to capitalize. You don't do it. If it's not supposed to be capitalized, don't do it. Put dashes or at least parentheses around your phone number, the area code parentheses, and a dash between the other set of numbers. Don't just clump them all together. That's a pet peeve for readers. Don't be ambiguous and unclear. Okay. Like if I got to look up a word, that's not fun as a hiring manager. You don't want to be outsmarted. So be understanding that, yes, be professional, but don't be using words that people got to, use a thesaurus for. Don't put a picture on it.
Okay.
Don't make it too long.
Also, you should include a cell phone number and an email. You do not need to then detail out your WhatsApp contact, your Skype contact. I remember this from business school. They said, the more ways you can be contacted, the less important you are. And, if you have that email signature that has, here's 19 ways to get a hold of me, you're clearly communicating that you're not the most important person.
Right. Unless you're going for a social influencer role, where it's completely, where they need to know all your spots you live. Yeah. No one wants your Facebook. I mean, if anything, your LinkedIn, I will say you could throw your URL up for your LinkedIn or a click through. But if you do, make sure your LinkedIn is looking good, because they will get on there. Employers love LinkedIn and seeing what you're doing as far as not just how you have it set up, but how do you engage with people? How do you share thought leadership and content? That stuff's getting real important.
And we will do a separate episode about that, because LinkedIn has somehow crossed the line to Facebook, where people are putting far too much personal content on LinkedIn. And
exactly.
I'm shocked I have some friends that it's their full-time hobby to find dumb LinkedIn pages and forward them to me. I have seen some really ridiculous stuff. I mean, literally, I have seen LinkedIn profiles where people are basically trying to use it as a dating service.
Oh, yeah. And especially with the political climate this past year, I can't believe some of these people putting on there. It's like, hey, this ain't for politics and stuff. This is professional and
network. Yeah.
And value offering stuff, thought leadership stuff. If you're a subject matter expert in the world of supply chain, they want to see what you offer and what you know about the world of supply chain. They don't care about what party you belong to.
Yeah.
And also, cover letter, no. Too much information. This can teeter when you're trying to offset some of those reservations and you're trying to explain ahead of time. Just make sure you don't overly do it. I understand. My example is, although I'm sure all 7 of your children are lovely, let's refrain from listing their names, ages, and hobbies.
Yeah.
Let's not have a whole paragraph about what brought you to Los Angeles was, this one fateful day. It's like, this is not an Amazon novel self-publishing type gig. This is a job as a project engineer. So let's get more relatable stuff towards project engineering on there and not get too much liberty taken with the personal stuff. Although I get it, it's allowed to have some personality. Don't overdo it either.
Yeah. And I would assume you should never mention a salary in a cover letter.
No, wait for them to bring that up regardless. We could do a whole nother thing about negotiations and how to handle all that after you get an offer. But yeah, I tell my clients, don't even bring it up interview 1. They will ask you where you're at. At that point, you can give them a range and know that the lowest number they hear is probably what they're going to try to lock you in at. But let them be the one who dictates the benefits and salary conversation. If you're on interview 1 and your only question at the end of the interview is, what's the benefits? They're turned off, because that just means you're in it for you. And I get it. It's important, blah, 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 but just it will become known. You will not start day 1 unaware of what your salary is. It will be eventually mentioned. And at that point you handle it.
And the best response, we should do another podcast about that, but the best response I've ever heard to that, what salary are you looking for kind of thing, is say, let's not talk about salary now. Let's make sure I'm the right person for the job. And if I am, I'm sure you'll take care of me.
Hey, I like that.
Perfect way to punt that.
You got to put that on a quote somewhere and throw it on LinkedIn.
Right next to my dating profile.
Yeah, there you go. With your creepy photo.
Yeah. Okay, but you did say no photo, which is good advice. Also,
no photo, yeah.
And when we're talking about the non-personal stuff, drop religion and politics. Do not say, even if you are a person of deep faith, do not say God called me to work for your company or something like that, because you don't know the religion or politics of the person who's reading the letter or the culture there. So you want to keep that level of personalization completely off your cover letter for sure.
That's correct. I actually have a client right now, a real good guy. He's a dean at a Catholic university or Christian university. And so his roles he's applying to are other Christian universities. They ask that specifically about religious statements and your beliefs. if their company culture is one of faith, they'll figure out your preference of that kind of the faith during the interview or what have you. They'll approach that with you. Don't make that known initially. Let them approach you if this is the kind of world you're going to go live in, because it'll come out. They that's where they do ask you about those kind of things. If you're going to go to a school that is, a Christian-based or a faith-based kind of institution or any sort of company.
And what are your thoughts about mentioning things like hobbies?
I'm always borderline on hobbies. I shouldn't say for the cover letter. No, because the cover letter is short and sweet. It's the question of, does it go on the resume? And this has just been one of those back and forth through the years. And I personally, when I was hiring, I didn't mind them because I kind of, gave me something extra to do as a recruiter. Like, although I'm fast paced anyway in my day to day, it was kind of fun, I guess, for lack of a better term. It just kind of made it, one little 5 second of non-blandness. But hiring managers might look at it as being wasted white space that you could have used to showcase another couple achievements. So be mindful. If you think you can get away with the white space on the resume, I would say it might be okay. I just personally, I don't think it's going to sway it one way or the other unless you just hit it on the head with the reader and they are exactly in the same kind of world of hobby that you are, and they understand that and they want to talk about it more. So, but most of the time, I just don't think it's really a big issue. I think they're more concerned about your work history and then your, value offerings.
Yeah, and I think more there are more guardrails around the work culture now, where it's almost like people don't want to know anything about your personal life. So,
it's true, and that's pre-pandemic, and that's exactly where we were. You wonder how it will be when we start getting back to work, and having, in-person meetings and that kind of stuff. You wonder how much emphasis will go into that thinking where, hey, maybe we'll have after hours, bring that back, on Fridays, or, like that kind of stuff, because this whole work-life balance and trying to get, mental health addressed now, and finally kind of like getting to the point where maybe you're not a number anymore. Not with everybody, obviously. There's gonna be companies that are just money hungry, but it'll be interesting to see in the next couple of years the shift in HR and the approach to work-life balance and employee health.
oh, I just thought of something as you were talking too. I had been thinking as we're doing this about finding a job when you're not currently employed, but how do you explain leaving a position in a cover letter? Like, it's time to move on, or I realized I need a bigger challenge.
Honesty is best. If you're clear and concise and direct, you cannot you can't hide it, or it might not get exposed during an interview. So I always say be honest. Now, if it's about a former manager that you hated and he hated you and whatever, then less is more. You just there was a different direction with management happening, and you just, it wasn't a part of your initial responsibilities or expectations when you began with the firm. So, it was just best for you to kind of part ways, kind of lighten the mood a little bit if it's something like that. But if it's like, if you were like, wanting to try something new and you're a career changer, make it known. But again, quick. These people don't want a whole paragraph about it. Just make it known though quickly. But yes, I agree. Yeah, you definitely want to address why you're not working anymore if it is some sort of an odd thing. If it's a downsizing, make it known that it was a mass downsizing, so they can't ask, why didn't you get saved? If there was a downsizing, how come you weren't one of the ones sticking around working still? So you got to kind of be honest and true. Less is more, and but don't try to, don't try to hide anything. If you just got to kind of reword it so it's not as in their face. Yes, it's not necessarily hiding it, but yeah, honesty is key.
Gotcha. All right. Well, that covers what I wanted to discuss about cover letter. So thank you for that. Now I'm going to throw you my final question that I ask all of my guests, which is, thinking about everything involved in being a successful adult, what is something you wish you figured out before you turned 25?
To stop playing around and take it serious, because life is hard to make a living and having responsibilities. And as older you get, the more you look back at yourself and say, there's a reason there's 20-year-old millionaires, and there's a reason people are doing what they love in life. Like maybe like me, I always wanted to be a PGA pro. And like, obviously I never put the work in, but you got to put the work in for anything to come to fruition. So the quicker you get at it, the easier I think it might be in the long run. I wouldn't want to say easier, but I think you'll be a little bit more well-guided versus trying to figure things out when you're 30. And that's kind of where I was. I had to figure things out, and it's scary. It could be daunting. So take life serious, because, as much as you want to mess around in school, that stuff still matters.
Yes, it does. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Matt. I really appreciate your time today.
Hey, thanks, Jim.
We'll have you back for sure. That concludes today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any follow-up questions, you can email me at askjimkta@gmail.com, or for more information, check out kitchentableadulting.com.